On my birthday, my family gave me a special present. When I opened it, it was an eviction notice for my own house. The day had started so normally I almost convinced myself my family cared. Balloons tied to the banister, a store-bought cake sweating on the counter, my mother fussing about icing as if this was the kind of homey scene she'd always dreamed of. My brother Carson poured himself another glass of wine before noon, bragging about his latest investment. My fiancé Daniel kept smiling in that tense, distracted way that made me think of a man with a secret burning a hole in his pocket. When they handed me the envelope, cream paper, gold seal, a ribbon like something out of a jewelry store box, I laughed. My mother said, "You'll love this one, Harper. It's a fresh start." Her voice had that syrupy tone she used when she was about to do something cruel and call it love. Inside wasn't jewelry. It wasn't tickets or a letter. It was a legal notice. An eviction, signed by Evelyn Calloway and Carson Calloway. Effective immediately, I had 30 days to vacate the property belonging to the Calloway Family Trust. My own address printed neatly at the top. For a second, my brain refused to read the words correctly. I blinked at the page like the letters would shift into something else, like it might become a prank. Then the meaning sank in, slow and heavy, until my stomach turned cold. I looked up. My mother was watching me like a cat waiting to see if the mouse had noticed the trap. Carson smirked over his glass. "We figured it was time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet," he said. Daniel's eyes darted anywhere but mine. He ran a hand through his hair, muttered something about not wanting drama on a special day. I laughed. The sound came out thin and strange, like something cracking. "You're evicting me? From my house?" "It was never really yours, sweetheart," Evelyn said, tilting her head. "You were just holding it under your name while we sorted the trust. You know how complicated paperwork can be." The kitchen seemed smaller then, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. My fingers shook around the paper, but I smiled anyway. That's the thing about being blindsided. You learn to hide your wounds before anyone can enjoy the sight of them. "Well," I said, folding the notice carefully, "thank you for the gift." Carson laughed. Daniel winced. Evelyn looked pleased, the way she always did when she thought she'd taught me a lesson. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat alone at the dining table. The empty cake box stared back at me. I reread the notice until the ink blurred, then set it down beside my untouched slice. I should have cried, but instead I started planning what to pack first. They thought they'd given me an ending. I didn't know it yet, but they'd just handed me the beginning of something much bigger. The next morning, I took the eviction notice straight to the county clerk's office. I didn't want to believe it was real. Maybe it was some kind of mistake, a cruel joke. The clerk, a tired woman with kind eyes, typed my address into her computer and frowned. "I'm sorry, Miss Calloway," she said softly. "This property was moved into the Calloway Family Trust 3 months ago." I felt my throat tighten. "That can't be right," I whispered. "I didn't sign anything." She turned the monitor slightly toward me. My name and signature were on the screen, clean and perfect. It even had the same little loop I made in my H, the one I'd had since high school. But it wasn't mine. Someone had copied it. My uncle, a lawyer who always took my mother's side, had handled the paperwork. Everything looked legal and neat, but I could tell it wasn't. They'd planned this carefully, each step hidden behind fake smiles and family dinners. I thanked the clerk, walked outside, and sat on the steps for a long time, holding the papers against my chest. The sun felt too bright. I couldn't understand how people around me were laughing, living, breathing, while my world had just split apart. I pulled out my phone and called Daniel. He answered after the 3rd ring, his voice flat. "We need to talk," I said. He sighed. "Harper, maybe this isn't the time." "Now, Daniel." We met at a cafe near his office. He looked uncomfortable, stirring his coffee again and again without drinking it. "So it's true," I said quietly. "You knew." His jaw tightened. "Your mom told me it was for the best. She said it was temporary, just to protect the house." "Protect it from who?" "Me," I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck, not meeting my eyes. "She promised to help fund my business if I didn't get involved. I didn't think she'd actually kick you out." I stared at him, realizing how easy it must have been for him to trade me for a chance at his dream. "So you stayed quiet," I said. "You watched them do this to me." He didn't answer. The silence between us said enough. I left the cafe without another word. That night, I went home and looked around the house one last time. The rooms were still filled with all the things I loved. The old bookshelf my dad built, the curtains I sewed myself, the little crack in the kitchen tile where I used to drop my coffee spoon. Everything felt heavier, like the air itself was telling me to go. I packed one suitcase. Just clothes, my laptop, and a few books. Before leaving, I took one last look at the living room, now filled with quiet shadows. The walls that once felt warm now looked like strangers watching me go. When I stepped outside, I didn't cry. I locked the door behind me, slipped the key into the mailbox, and walked to my car. The house that used to be mine sat still and silent in the dark. They thought they had taken everything from me. But as I drove away, I realized they'd given me something too, a reason to never look back. The apartment I found was small and old, with thin walls and a leaky faucet that never stopped dripping. Still, it was a place to sleep, and that was enough for now. I didn't bother decorating or unpacking much. My boxes sat in a corner, half opened. Every sound in that apartment echoed. My own footsteps, the hum of the fridge, even my breathing. It was strange how silence could feel so heavy. I spent the first few days trying to understand how people I trusted could do something like that. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's calm face at that table, the way she acted like she had done nothing wrong. I tried not to think about Daniel, but his silence hurt more than his words ever did. I stopped answering calls. Nobody reached out except for one person, my Aunt June. Aunt June lived in a small cottage on the edge of town. My mother never liked her and rarely mentioned her name, but I remembered that she was always kind to me as a child. One evening, I drove to see her. She opened the door before I could even knock, as if she had been expecting me. "You look tired," she said softly. "I lost the house," I replied. "They took everything." She led me to the kitchen, where the smell of fresh tea filled the air. We sat at the small table. I told her what happened, about the papers, the forged signature, Daniel's betrayal. She didn't look surprised. When I finished, she sighed and said, "Your mother's been doing things like this for years. You're not the first." Her words hit me harder than I expected. "What do you mean?" "She tricked your uncle out of part of his inheritance. Used our cousin's savings to cover one of Carson's debts. Evelyn always makes it look legal, but it never is. She hides everything behind paperwork and charm." I stared at her, unsure whether to feel angry or numb. She reached into a drawer and took out a small notepad. She wrote something on it and slid it across the table. "Martin Cole," she said. "He's the accountant who manages the trust. He knows more than he lets on." I took the paper, folding it carefully. "Why are you helping me?" She smiled faintly. "Because someone needs to stop her." When I left June's house that night, the sky was dark and cold. I sat in my car for a long time, thinking about everything she'd said. The anger that had been buried under shock started to rise again, but it felt different this time. Calmer. Focused. At home, I began to collect everything I had: emails, letters, photos, even old bills. I opened a notebook and started to write down dates and names. Every detail mattered now. I made copies of the eviction papers and highlighted every signature and seal. My hands shook, but I didn't stop. Each night I told myself one thing. If they wanted a game built on lies, I would learn how to play it better. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about truth and taking back control of my own story. And for the first time since that birthday, I felt something close to purpose. I made an appointment with Martin Cole, pretending I wanted to check some information about the family trust. My voice sounded calm on the phone, though my heart was pounding. He agreed to meet the next afternoon at his office downtown. His office was quiet and smelled faintly of paper and dust. Stacks of files covered his desk, each labeled with tidy handwriting. Martin was a short man with thinning hair and nervous hands. He smiled when I walked in, but his eyes avoided mine. "Harper," he said, standing up too quickly. "I didn't expect to hear from you." "I just need to understand a few things," I replied, setting my folder down. "Some of the documents about the trust don't make sense." He motioned for me to sit, already sweating. "Everything's in order," he said, forcing a smile. "Your mother and brother have handled everything properly." I leaned forward. "Then maybe you can explain why my name was used without permission." That made him freeze. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glasses. "I don't think I can discuss confidential matters," he murmured. I kept my voice steady. "Martin, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want the truth. If there's something wrong, I'd rather hear it from you than from a lawyer later." He looked at me for a long time before sighing. "Evelyn said the transfer was only temporary," he said quietly. "She told me it was to protect family assets. I didn't question it at first. I waited, saying nothing. He rubbed his temples and added, "But then she used the property as collateral for a loan. Carson needed money for his business, and she didn't want the bank to know he already owed too much. The house was valuable enough to cover it." The air seemed to thicken. "So they risked my home to pay for his debt," I said slowly. He nodded, ashamed. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. She promised to restore ownership once things settled, but she never did. And there's something else." I stayed still, letting him continue. "She adjusted a few numbers in the filings, small things that could pass unnoticed. Tax deductions that shouldn't exist, altered dates. It's messy, Harper. If anyone checks closely, it won't look good." He glanced nervously toward the door, lowering his voice. "I shouldn't have helped her. I'm sorry." I thanked him softly, pretending to accept his apology. As he spoke, my phone, resting on the desk beside my notebook, quietly recorded every word. When I left the office, the wind outside felt colder, sharper. I walked down the street without any clear direction, just letting the noise of traffic cover the thoughts racing in my head. Evelyn hadn't just betrayed me. She'd lied to everyone, even the law. By the time I reached my car, my fear had shifted into something clear and solid. I had proof now, not just suspicions. I sat behind the wheel, played back the short recording, and listened to his voice confirm everything. It wasn't enough to fix what I'd lost, but it was a start. I didn't know exactly how I'd use it yet, but one thing was certain: I wouldn't stay silent any longer. I stopped answering messages from anyone with the last name Calloway. The fewer questions they asked, the easier it was to stay unnoticed. When people in town mentioned my family, I only smiled and said I was doing fine. Most believed me. It was easier that way. I needed space to think, to rebuild, and I couldn't do that with everyone watching. Days passed quietly. I kept to myself, reading about legal cases online and trying to understand how property laws really worked. The more I learned, the clearer it became that what my mother did wasn't just cruel. It might also be illegal. That thought gave me a strange kind of strength. I realized knowledge could be a weapon, sharper than anger. One evening, I came across an advertisement for a paralegal night course at the community college. It promised to teach the basics of contracts, real estate, and trust management. I signed up without hesitation. During the day, I took a part-time job at a law firm's library, organizing files and records. It was quiet work, but it let me observe how lawyers built cases and how every small detail could make or break a defense. At first, I felt out of place. Most of the students in class were younger, full of energy and confidence. I sat in the back, taking notes quietly, barely speaking. But soon I found myself absorbed in the lessons. Terms like title transfer, fraudulent conveyance, and fiduciary duty began to make sense. Each word felt like another key, unlocking something I hadn't understood before. The pain of losing my house never fully went away. Sometimes I'd drive by it late at night, parking far enough not to be seen. The lights in the windows looked unfamiliar, like the place itself had forgotten me. But the sadness that used to fill me now turned into something more focused. I wasn't crying anymore. I was learning how to fight back. Months later, I overheard two clients at the law office talking about an upcoming wedding. When I caught the names Carson Calloway and Marissa Green, I froze. My brother was engaged. Marissa's family was wealthy and well-known in the area. I searched online and saw pictures of them smiling, standing in front of my old house. The caption said, "The Calloway estate will host the wedding of the year." The sight of that headline made my chest tighten, but not from sadness. It was something colder. They were using my home as a backdrop for their next performance, pretending everything was perfect. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the laptop. That night, I didn't sleep much. My mind kept turning over the pieces I had, documents, recordings, and what I had learned about trusts and property law. Everything was starting to fit together like puzzle pieces. I realized I didn't need to shout or make scenes. Silence had become my shield, and now it could be my strategy too. When the wedding announcement appeared in the local paper the next week, I smiled for the first time in months. They thought I had disappeared, but I was still here, watching, waiting, and preparing for the day I would take everything back in my own quiet way. I called Aunt June after months of silence. She answered almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for that call. I told her I had learned enough about trusts and property law to finally understand what my mother and brother had done, but I needed help finding solid evidence. June agreed to meet me the next morning. Her kitchen table was covered in papers when I arrived: old bank statements, photocopies of property deeds, and notes written in her neat handwriting. She had been keeping track of Evelyn's transactions for years, quietly collecting proof. "Your mother always thought no one was watching," she said, handing me a folder. Inside were records showing suspicious money transfers between the family trust and Carson's failed business. We spent hours sorting through everything. The more we uncovered, the worse it looked. The trust had missing funds, backdated documents, and strange deductions that didn't match the reports filed with the county. It was clear Evelyn and Carson had been using the trust to move money around and hide taxes. It wasn't just a family dispute anymore. It was fraud. That night, I reviewed every page again, making notes in the margins. My pulse quickened as I realized there was enough to file a complaint. I typed up a report and attached copies of the most important documents. The next day, I submitted it to the authorities under my own name. I wasn't afraid anymore. A few days later, I got a response. The IRS would begin a review of the Calloway Family Trust. A legal injunction was also accepted for review, claiming the deed transfer had been done without proper consent. The case was officially opened, and the hearing was scheduled for the same week as Carson's wedding. The timing almost felt poetic. June laughed when I told her. "Fate works fast when you stop running," she said. Still, I didn't want to just rely on paperwork. I wanted to be there, to see their faces when everything came crashing down. Through one of June's friends, who worked in event planning, I found out the wedding staff needed extra help. I signed up under a false last name, volunteering as a floral assistant. My job would be arranging centerpieces and helping set up the decorations. No one would recognize me if I stayed quiet and kept my hair tucked under the cap they provided. The night before the wedding, I stood in front of the mirror, testing my disguise. Simple clothes, no makeup, hair hidden under a plain cap. My reflection looked ordinary, forgettable, and that was exactly what I needed to be. I packed a small folder in my bag with a few copies of the documents and a letter confirming the audit date. My plan wasn't to cause a scene. I wanted the truth to arrive naturally, at the moment they least expected it. Before going to bed, I called June one last time. She wished me luck and told me to keep calm. "You don't need to shout to be heard," she said. "Just let the truth speak for you." Her words stayed with me. I didn't feel nervous anymore. By the time the sun rose, I was ready. They wanted a perfect wedding at my expense, but it would become the day everything they built on lies finally fell apart. The day of the wedding arrived bright and clear, the kind of morning that seemed too perfect to be real. I drove toward the Calloway estate before sunrise, dressed in plain clothes that made me look like any other worker setting up for the event. My name tag read H. Cole, the alias I had chosen to blend in. No one looked twice when I entered through the service gate with the rest of the staff. Walking inside my old house felt strange. The rooms were filled with flowers, lights, and people rushing to make everything perfect. The scent of lilies and roses covered the familiar smell of wood polish and coffee that once filled these walls. For a moment, I stood in the hallway, remembering the sound of my father's laughter and how my mother used to smile in this same place years ago, before she turned everything into a performance. I shook off the thought. This wasn't the time to dwell on the past. Evelyn was easy to spot. She moved through the crowd like a queen, giving orders and smiling for photographers. Pearls around her neck, designer dress shimmering under the light. Her voice carried across the room as she reminded the staff to make everything picture perfect. Carson followed behind her, busy greeting guests, pretending he was self-made. No one noticed me as I carried boxes of flowers from the van to the reception tent. I kept my head down and worked quietly, just another helper doing her job. Beneath my calm expression, my mind was steady, focused. Each trip gave me time to look around and plan where I would leave the envelopes. By mid-morning, the ceremony area was ready. Rows of white chairs lined the garden, soft music playing from hidden speakers. Guests began to arrive, smiling, chatting, unaware of what was about to happen. I slipped away from the flower team for a few minutes, holding a small bundle of cream envelopes tied with string. Inside each one was a single printed notice: Calloway Family Trust, Federal Review pending. Suspected fraudulent deed activity. I moved slowly through the rows, pretending to adjust decorations. Every few chairs, I slid an envelope underneath the seat cushion. No one paid attention. The laughter of guests and the hum of music covered the sound of paper brushing against fabric. My hands were steady, though my heartbeat was loud in my ears. When I was done, I stepped back to the side of the garden and watched as the last guests took their seats. Carson stood near the arch, grinning for the photographer. Evelyn waved proudly to the crowd. Everything looked perfect, just as she wanted. The officiant began to speak, his voice calm and warm. The breeze moved gently through the garden, lifting the corners of tablecloths and flower petals. From where I stood, I could see the white envelopes still hidden beneath the seats, waiting. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. My work was already done. The truth was sitting quietly under every chair, ready to be found the moment the ceremony began. The same house that once held my humiliation was now the stage for their downfall. All I had to do was wait. The ceremony began with soft music and nervous laughter from the guests. Carson stood at the front, smiling too wide, while Marissa glowed beside him in her lace dress. Evelyn sat in the front row, proud and composed, her pearls catching the light. Every detail screamed perfection, the kind of image she loved to project. I stayed near the back, pretending to adjust the flowers near the aisle. The officiant cleared his throat and started the vows. I watched Evelyn, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes fixed on her son. She didn't know that everything she'd built on lies was seconds away from collapsing. My heart beat steady, not with anger, but with calm certainty. Halfway through the vows, a black SUV rolled up the gravel path. I noticed it first, but within seconds, heads began to turn. The music faltered. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, followed by a uniformed county officer. They moved with quiet purpose, not rushing, not hesitating. The officiant stopped mid-sentence as the men approached the tent. A ripple of whispers spread through the guests. "Is this part of the ceremony?" someone murmured. The lead agent spoke firmly, his voice carrying over the quiet crowd. "We're looking for Evelyn Calloway and Carson Calloway." Evelyn blinked, confusion flickering across her face. I'm Evelyn," she said, rising slowly from her seat. Her confidence wavered as the man pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Mrs. Calloway, you're being served with a federal summons regarding an ongoing tax and property investigation," he said clearly. He turned to Carson. "You as well, Mr. Calloway." Gasps filled the tent. The guests looked at one another, unsure if it was real. The photographer lowered his camera, and even the band stopped playing. Evelyn tried to laugh, though it sounded forced. "There must be a mistake," she said quickly. "We're in the middle of a wedding." The officer handed her the papers anyway. Her fingers trembled as she took them. I could see her lips move as she read the words printed across the top. Federal Review. Calloway Family Trust. Fraud allegations pending. Her smile vanished completely. From my spot near the back, I stepped forward. The crowd parted slightly, eyes turning toward me. I removed the cap that had hidden my face all morning. For a second, no one moved. Then Evelyn saw me. Her eyes widened, and the color drained from her cheeks. "Harper," she whispered, as if saying my name might undo what was happening. I walked closer, calm and quiet, until I stood a few feet away. The agents didn't interrupt. They didn't have to. Every guest was already whispering, every camera already aimed in our direction. I looked at her, at Carson, at the house standing proudly behind them, the house that used to be mine. Then I handed her a small white box, neatly wrapped, the same one she'd given me months ago on my birthday. "Consider this my wedding gift," I said. Evelyn's hand shook as she opened the box. Inside was the eviction notice she had once signed, the paper that had started everything. Around us, the whispers grew louder. Her perfect day was falling apart, piece by piece, just like she'd once planned for me. And I didn't need to say anything else. The truth was already louder than anything I could have said. For a few seconds, everything at the wedding stood still. Then the silence broke like glass. Guests rose from their seats, whispering and pointing. The music stopped completely. Evelyn tried to speak, but her voice was lost under the noise. Carson turned red, clutching the papers as though he could tear the problem out of existence. The agents moved aside, letting the confusion unfold on its own. Marissa stepped back from Carson, her expression frozen between shock and disgust. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice trembling. Carson tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled away. Without waiting for an answer, she turned and walked out of the tent, her dress brushing against the chairs as she passed. The photographers kept their cameras down now. No one wanted to capture what was left of the perfect day. Evelyn shouted for the guests to stay, to let her explain, but no one listened. People hurried toward the exits, muttering apologies and excuses. Some looked at me, unsure of what to say. I didn't return their glances. The moment wasn't about me. It was about truth finally catching up with them. Daniel appeared near the aisle, pale and sweating. He stepped in front of me as I turned to leave. "Harper," he said quietly. "I didn't know it would end like this. I never wanted." I didn't stop. I walked right past him, the gravel crunching under my shoes. Behind me, his voice faded with the growing noise. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the air was warm and still. I reached my car, removed the floral assistant badge, and set it on the passenger seat. As I drove away, the estate grew smaller in the rearview mirror. The house no longer felt like mine or theirs. It was just a building filled with broken promises. The following weeks were strangely quiet. The story of the ruined wedding spread fast around town. People talked about it in shops, cafes, even online, but I kept to myself. I focused on my work and waited for official news. I didn't need revenge stories. I needed results. A month later, a letter arrived from the county office. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside was confirmation that the Calloway Family Trust had been frozen pending full investigation. Evelyn and Carson were facing charges for fraud and tax evasion. The documents they had forged were now evidence. The final line of the letter said the property would be seized and sold at auction by the county. For a long time, I stared at that sentence. It didn't bring joy, but it brought peace. The house that once symbolized betrayal would no longer belong to anyone who had destroyed my trust. It would become just another address, stripped of their power. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. That night, I made tea and sat by my window, watching the quiet street outside. No anger, no noise, just stillness. The people who had tried to take everything from me had lost more than they ever expected. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight lift. Justice had moved slowly, but it had arrived all the same. Months passed, and life finally began to settle into a calm rhythm. I had moved into a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy but warm and mine alone. The rent was fair, the garden tiny but green, and for the first time in years, the space felt honest. No hidden papers, no lies. Just walls that belonged to me. Each morning, I woke to quiet. The hum of the kettle, the sound of birds outside. It was all simple, and that was enough. I started volunteering at the local library again, helping organize community events. People there didn't know my story, and I liked it that way. I was just Harper, not the woman whose family betrayed her. Sometimes I thought about Evelyn and Carson, but only briefly. The court had taken its course, and whatever happened after no longer concerned me. They had built their lives on deception, and now they were the ones left to clean up the ruins. I didn't hate them anymore. I had simply let them go. That was its own kind of freedom. My birthday came quietly that year. I didn't throw a party or invite anyone over. The table held a small cake, a cup of tea, and one single envelope waiting for me. The handwriting on the front was familiar. I opened it slowly and found a white lily pressed between parchment. A short note from Aunt June was tucked inside. Justice blooms slow, but it blooms. I smiled, setting the flower gently in a vase. The petals were fragile, almost translucent, but beautiful. That simple gesture said everything words couldn't. I looked around my little house, sunlight spilling across the floorboards, and breathed in the stillness. There were no ghosts of the past here, only the quiet hum of a new life beginning. I didn't need grand gestures or apologies. I had already written the ending in my own way. I cut a small slice of cake and whispered, almost to myself, "Happy birthday." The words felt light, without bitterness, without pain. Just truth. For the first time, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace, and it was finally mine. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from my family after everything they did? Or should I have forgiven them and tried again? I'd really like to know what you think, so share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell.